June Marlowe was 34 years old, soaked through by Oregon rain, and down to the last $11 she had in the world when she raised her hand at the county auction. The property at the far edge of the yard was not a house. It was a burned-out greenhouse beside an old logging road, its glass shattered, its metal ribs bent black, its potting benches collapsed into wet ash. The men under the umbrellas laughed when the auctioneer called her bid. One said she had just bought a graveyard for plants. Another said a woman with a child should know better than to pay money for something already dead. June heard every word. She kept her daughter Emmy's cold fingers folded inside her own and looked past the crowd at the ruined greenhouse. It looked empty. It looked worthless. But what nobody knew was that the fire had not taken everything. Beneath the ash, beneath the cracked soil and broken glass, something had been left waiting. And the man laughing loudest that morning had a reason to hope June Marlowe would never find it. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. If stories about people the world underestimated mean something to you, hit the like button and subscribe, because this one begins with a woman everyone thought had finally run out of places to stand. June had learned early that a roof did not always mean a home. When she was a girl, she and her mother moved from one rented room to another along the wet back roads of Oregon. Some rooms smelled of old smoke. Some had windows painted shut. One had a heater that clicked all night without ever warming the floor. Her mother cleaned cabins, washed diner aprons, and took laundry from families who never learned her first name. But wherever they lived, she kept something green near the window, a chipped mug of mint, a coffee can with parsley. Once, in a room so narrow the bed touched both walls, she grew lavender in a cracked soup bowl. June remembered watching her mother press 2 fingers into the soil before watering. "Don't drown it just because it looks thirsty," her mother would say. "You have to learn what it's really asking for." One winter, the landlord raised the rent, and her mother packed their life into 3 cardboard boxes. June wrapped the lavender bowl in a towel and asked if they could keep it. Her mother looked at the plant, then at the room they were losing. "We keep what still has roots," she said. The lavender died later, but the sentence stayed with June. By the time she was grown, June had become a woman who noticed small things. Poor people had to. Small things were often the only warning they got. She noticed when the diner coffee was replaced with cheaper grounds but sold for the same price. She noticed when a waitress with 3 children stopped taking home less than she had earned. June kept a blue spiral notebook in the pocket of her apron. It had bent corners, a rubber band around it, and pages filled with numbers. Rent due, gas money, school shoes, hours worked, tips counted, tips paid. On the last pages, she wrote down the names of plants she remembered from her mother's windowsills. Mint for the stomach, yarrow for bleeding, lavender for sleep, calendula for skin. She did not know enough to impress people with framed certificates. But she knew how to watch. She knew how to count. She knew the difference between a mistake and a pattern. And Wade Barlow's diner was full of patterns. Barlow's diner sat beside the main road where logging trucks passed before dawn, their headlights sliding across the windows. June worked the early shift, the lunch rush, and the late cleanup whenever another waitress called in sick. Her daughter Emmy was 6 years old and had learned to sleep in the narrow storage room behind the kitchen, curled beneath June's old coat while the freezers hummed through the wall. Sometimes, when the diner went quiet, Emmy sat in the last booth with crayons and drew on the backs of paper menus. She drew houses with wide windows. She drew gardens with flowers taller than people. Once, she drew June standing in front of a small shop with a crooked purple sign over the door. The sign said, "Open." "What do I sell there?" June asked, setting down a bowl of soup the cook had saved for them. Emmy tapped the crayon against her lip. "Things that smell good," she said. "And things that make people better." June smiled, but the picture hurt in a place she did not show. She folded the menu carefully and slipped it inside her notebook. By spring, the diner changed. The waitresses whispered near the coffee station. The tip jar emptied faster than it used to. Wade Barlow started taking the register drawer into his office before closing, even on nights when June was assigned to count it. One Friday, after rain had beaten against the windows all evening, June stayed late to mop. The last trucker had gone. Emmy slept in the storage room, with one hand resting on the folded open sign. June carried the mop bucket past Wade's office and stopped. The door was not fully closed. Inside, Wade stood at his desk beneath the yellow light. The tip jar sat open beside 2 receipt books and a ledger. His thumb moved through the bills. He placed one pile in his drawer, wrote a smaller number in the ledger, and slid the rest into an envelope marked Staff. June stood very still. Rain ticked against the back window. Wade looked up. His face did not show fear. It showed annoyance. "You need something?" he asked. June looked at the ledger. Then she looked at the jar. She thought of the waitresses counting quarters for gas. She thought of Emmy sleeping behind the kitchen. She thought of her mother pressing 2 fingers into dry soil. "That money isn't yours," June said. Wade smiled without warmth. And that was the night June Marlowe's life began to come apart. Not with thunder, not with shouting, but with a tip jar on a desk, a false number in a ledger, and a door behind her that would soon be locked for good. June did not sleep after that. She lay on the narrow cot in the storage room behind the diner kitchen while the freezers hummed and the rain kept tapping the metal vent above her head. Emmy slept beside her, one small knee pressed against June's leg, her purple open sign folded under the pillow like a secret map to a better life. On the other side of the wall, Barlow's diner sat dark and quiet. The booths were wiped clean. The coffee urns were unplugged. The tip jar was back on the counter, empty now, washed and shining as if it had never held anything that belonged to tired women with aching feet. June stared at the ceiling and replayed what she had seen. The bills in Wade's hand, the 2 receipt books, the smaller number written in the ledger, the envelope marked Staff. She wanted to believe there was some explanation, because life was easier when wrong things had innocent reasons. But June had spent too many years counting nickels to lie to herself. By morning, Wade acted as if nothing had happened. He stood behind the counter in his clean white shirt, pouring coffee for truckers and calling every man by name. He laughed when old Mr. Beals complained about the rain. He told the cook to put extra bacon on a sheriff's plate. He even smiled at Emmy when she slipped into the last booth with her crayons. But when June tied her apron, Wade leaned close enough for her to smell aftershave over the grease. "Best thing for you," he said softly, "is to forget what you thought you saw." June kept her eyes on the row of mugs beneath the warmer. "I know what I saw." His smile stayed in place. "No. You think you know. There's a difference." All through the breakfast rush, June moved like a woman carrying a bowl too full to spill. She refilled coffee. She wrote down orders. She brought plates of eggs and biscuits to men who nodded at Wade but looked straight through her. Every time a dollar went into the tip jar, she heard the soft paper sound of it like a warning. At noon, when the other waitresses gathered by the sink, June lowered her voice. "Have your tips been short?" No one answered at first. Ruthie, who had twins at home and a husband laid up with a crushed ankle, kept scrubbing the same clean spoon. Marta looked toward Wade's office, then away. A younger girl named Beth gave June a frightened look. Finally, Ruthie whispered, "Don't start." That hurt more than June expected. "I'm not starting anything," June said. "I'm asking. You're asking the kind of question that gets people fired." The sink steamed between them. Outside, a loaded timber truck rolled past, shaking the windows in their frames. June wanted one of them to say they had noticed it too. She wanted one voice beside hers, one hand on the same table. But fear had a way of making good people fold themselves small. That afternoon, June opened her blue notebook and began copying numbers more carefully. She wrote the amount she saw customers leave. She wrote the names on the receipts. She marked the envelopes Wade handed out at closing. She did not steal a paper. She did not open a drawer. She only watched, counted, and wrote down what passed in front of her own eyes. For 8 days, the pattern sharpened. The jar filled. The envelope shrank. Wade grew polite in a way that felt like a knife wrapped in a napkin. He gave June extra side work. He told her to clean the freezer floor twice. He sent her to wipe windows while the other women divided the lunch tables. Then, one evening, he stopped her in the hallway outside the storage room. "You're living here because I allow it," he said. June looked past him at Emmy's little shoes beside the cot. I work for that room. You work because I let you. There it was, plain at last. Not anger. Ownership. June felt something old rise in her chest. The same tightness she had felt as a child when landlords spoke over her mother's head as if poverty made a woman hard of hearing. Wade lowered his voice. A woman alone with a kid should be careful who she accuses. June did not answer. She knew he wanted fear to come out of her mouth so he could use it against her. That night, after Emmy fell asleep, June took out the folded menu with the purple open sign. She laid it beside her notebook under the weak bulb. On one page were numbers Wade had changed. On the other was a child's drawing of a door that belonged to them. For the first time in years, June let herself cry. Not loudly. Not in a way anyone could hear. Just a silent, shaking kind of grief that moved through her, while rain slid down the back window, and the diner settled around her like a place that had never truly been safe. By dawn, her tears had dried. She washed her face in the small sink, braided Emmy's hair, and put the notebook back in her apron pocket. She did not know yet where courage would lead her. She only knew that silence had already cost too much. And before that week was over, Wade Barlow would make sure June Marlowe understood exactly what a woman could lose for telling the truth. The day June decided to speak, the rain stopped. After weeks of gray mornings and water running down the diner windows, the sky opened clear and cold above the logging town. Sunlight touched the wet road. Steam lifted from parked trucks. The mountains beyond the mill showed themselves for the first time in days. It should have felt like mercy. Instead, June walked into Barlow's diner with her blue notebook in her coat pocket and the sick knowledge that a clear day gave people fewer places to hide. She waited until after the breakfast rush. She served coffee, carried plates, smiled when customers called her honey, and kept her hands steady while Wade moved around the counter like a man who owned the air inside the building. At 10:30, when the last two loggers left and the cook stepped outside to smoke, June went to Wade's office. The door was open. Wade sat behind his desk, reading invoices. He did not look up. "I need to talk to you," June said. "That so?" She took out her notebook and laid it on the desk. "The tips are short. They've been short for more than a week." Now he looked at her. June opened to the marked pages. She had written dates, receipt totals, names when she knew them, and the amounts she had seen customers leave in the jar. Beside those numbers, she had written what Wade handed out at closing. "I counted what came in," she said. "I counted what went out." Wade leaned back slowly. His face went still in the way water went still before it froze. "You've been spying on my business? I've been watching money that belongs to the staff." He smiled once, without humor. "You mean women who wouldn't have jobs if I didn't give them one." June felt her pulse in her throat, but her voice stayed quiet. "That doesn't make their money yours." The old wall clock ticked above the filing cabinet. Wade stood, came around the desk, and picked up the notebook between two fingers as if it were something dirty. "You know what this looks like to me?" he said. "It looks like a desperate woman trying to cover her own hands." June stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about missing cash." "There isn't any missing cash except what you took." His expression hardened. "Careful." The word landed softly, but it carried the weight of a closed fist. June reached for the notebook. Wade pulled it back. "That's mine." "Not anymore," he said. For 1 second, panic nearly broke through her. In that notebook were rent numbers, grocery lists, Emmy's shoe size, plant names, and the purple open sign folded between 2 pages. It was the small paper map of how June had survived. She stepped forward. "Give it back." Wade lowered his voice. "You listen to me. You are done here." The words were so simple that June did not understand them at first. Then the cook came in through the back door. Ruthie appeared near the hallway. Marta stopped with a towel in her hands. Everyone looked at June, then at Wade, then at the notebook. Wade raised his voice just enough. "I gave this woman work. I gave her a room when nobody else would rent to her. And now, I find out she's been keeping private notes on my business and making accusations because she can't explain money going missing on her shifts." "That's a lie," June said. No one moved. Ruthie's eyes filled with shame, but she looked down. Marta pressed the towel to her chest. Beth stood half-hidden behind the coffee station, pale and silent. Wade walked to the wall hook and took down June's apron. He folded it once, then dropped it on the desk. "Get your child," he said, "and get out." June felt the room narrow around her. "Our things are in the back. You have 20 minutes. I paid for that room with every shift you gave me." "You paid for nothing," Wade said. "You were allowed to stay there. That allowance is over." Emmy was sitting on the cot when June entered the storage room. The child looked up from her crayons and knew something was wrong before June spoke. "Are we leaving?" Emmy asked. June swallowed. "Yes, baby. Did I do something?" That nearly broke her. "No." June knelt and took Emmy's small face in her hands. "You did nothing wrong." They packed in silence because there was almost nothing to pack. 2 bags of clothes, a cracked thermos, a tin box with 3 photographs, Emmy's crayons, the folded purple open sign, June's work shoes, a blanket that smelled faintly of fryer oil. When June came back through the diner, customers had begun drifting in for lunch. Wade stood behind the counter, telling a story loudly enough to make people turn and stare. June did not defend herself. Not there. Not with Emmy holding the blanket against her chest. At the door, Wade called after her. "A woman in your position ought to learn gratitude." June stopped with her hand on the frame. Outside, the clear day had turned bright enough to hurt her eyes. She looked back once, not at Wade, but at the women behind him. Ruthie, Marta, Beth, all of them trapped in the same room, all of them afraid of the same man. Then June said, "Gratitude is not the same as silence." She walked out before her voice could shake. By evening, the whole town had heard Wade's version. June had stolen. June had lied. June had become unstable. June had taken advantage of a generous man who had tried to help her. The landlord above the feed store refused to rent to her. The church secretary said the emergency fund was empty. The sheriff told June it sounded like a civil matter unless she had proof, and when she said Wade had taken her notebook, he only shrugged. "Hard to prove a thing you don't have," he said. That night, June parked her old pickup behind the closed feed store. Emmy slept under 2 coats on the passenger seat, while June sat awake behind the wheel, watching fog gather over the road. In her pocket, she found $11 she had hidden from herself for gas. A crumpled 5, 3 ones, 12 quarters. Not enough for rent. Not enough for a lawyer. Barely enough for food. At dawn, June saw a county auction notice stapled crookedly to the feed store wall. Most of the paper was damp, but one line was still readable. Tax Lot 14, burned commercial greenhouse East Road opening bid $10. June stood in the cold morning light and read the line twice. She had no safe choice left. So, she chose the only door still cracked open. June drove to the county auction with the $11 in her coat pocket and Emmy asleep against the passenger door. The morning had gone back to rain. Not a storm, not rain that announced itself with thunder. This was Oregon rain, patient and cold, falling through the fir trees in gray threads until the whole world looked blurred around the edges. June kept both hands on the wheel. Her pickup rattled whenever it climbed a hill, and the heater breathed air only slightly warmer than the glass. Beside her, Emmy wore 2 sweaters and held the folded purple open sign against her chest. "Are we buying a house?" Emmy asked. June watched the wet road. "Not exactly. A room? Maybe a place that could become one." Emmy accepted that with the solemn faith of a child who had already learned not to ask for too much. The auction yard sat behind the county maintenance building, bordered by blackberry thickets and a chain-link fence. A row of unwanted properties had been posted on a plywood board near the gate. Tax lots, failed businesses, inherited places no family had claimed. Small ruins with official numbers pinned to them. Men stood under umbrellas and truck caps, laughing into paper cups of coffee. A few women waited near the back, coats buttoned tight, eyes lowered against the rain. June recognized too many faces. That was the trouble with a small town. Even when no one helped you fall, everyone showed up to watch where you landed. Wade Barlow was there, too. He stood near the auctioneer with a black umbrella and polished boots, dressed as if mud had no right to touch him. When he saw June, His eyebrows lifted in that mild, amused way that made her feel smaller without him raising his voice. "Well," he said as she passed, "this ought to be interesting." June did not answer. Emmy's hand slipped into hers. The first lots went quickly. A shed sold to a man who wanted scrap lumber. A roadside ditch sold to no one. An old smokehouse brought $40 from a farmer who said he could use the tin. June waited until the auctioneer called tax lot 14. "Burned commercial greenhouse, East Road," he said, reading from a damp clipboard. "No active business license. Structure damage. Unknown repair cost. Partial water rights under county review. Opening bid, $10. The laughter began before he finished. June looked toward the far edge of the auction yard, where a photograph of the property had been clipped to the board. Even in the grainy picture, the greenhouse looked ruined beyond kindness. The roof sagged, the glass was gone. Black ribs rose from weeds like the bones of a dead animal. $10, June said. Her voice sounded thinner than she wanted, but it carried. Heads turned. Wade looked at her, then at the photograph, and smiled. 11. The word was casual, almost lazy. But June understood what it meant. He did not want the greenhouse. He wanted her to remember that even the cheapest thing in town could be moved out of reach. June put her hand into her pocket and felt the bills and coins. A crumpled 5. 3 ones. 12 quarters. Exactly $11. She could not bid 12. She could not pretend. She had spent too much of life pretending she had more room than she did. "I have 11, she said. "That is all I have." For a moment the rain seemed louder than the crowd. Then someone snickered. Wade's smile widened. He could have ended it with one more dollar. Instead, he stepped back and lifted both hands. "Let her have it," he said. "A pile of ashes for a woman who likes making trouble." The auctioneer glanced at him, then at June. $11. Going once, going twice. Sold. No one clapped. June walked forward, placed every dollar and every quarter into the clerk's metal cash box, and signed her name on the wet paper with a borrowed pen. The ink bled slightly under her hand, but the letters stayed readable. June Marlowe. For the first time in years, her name sat beside something that was hers, even if the whole town thought that something was worthless. By afternoon, she and Emmy were driving east. The town thinned behind them. The diner passed on the left, its windows glowing warm against the rain. June did not slow down. She saw Wade's truck near the side door and kept driving. Past the last gas station, the road narrowed and climbed into logging country. Fir trees pressed close on both sides. Ferns crowded the ditches. Mist clung between the trunks in pale sheets. Every few miles, a gravel spur broke away toward land that had been cut, replanted, and cut again. Emmy watched the trees slide past. "Will there be bears?" she asked. "Maybe." "Will they come inside?" "Not if we don't invite them." That made Emmy smile for the first time all day. June tried to smile back, but the farther they drove, the more the reality settled over her. She had bought a place she had not walked through. She had no tools except what lay in the truck bed: a rusted shovel, a tire iron, 2 blankets, 1 lantern, and half a roll of duct tape. She had no job, no room, no notebook, no proof of what Wade had done. All she had was a child, a title receipt, and a ruined greenhouse waiting somewhere in the rain. The East Road appeared after a bend, marked by a wooden sign half swallowed by moss. June turned onto it. The pickup bumped over potholes filled with brown water. Branches scraped the doors. The air seemed colder there, shaded by tall trees and abandoned land. At last, the greenhouse came into view. It stood behind a rusted gate at the end of a muddy track, worse than the photograph had promised. Charred metal ribs arched over a floor of blackened soil. Shards of old glass glittered in the weeds. One sidewall had folded inward. Blackberry vines crawled through the broken frame as if the forest had already begun taking it back. Near the gate, a wooden sign hung crooked from one nail. Most of the letters had peeled away. June stepped out into the rain and wiped mud from the surface with her sleeve. Only 3 faint words remained. Rusk Medicinal Nursery. She did not know what they meant, but behind her, Emmy whispered, "Mom, it used to grow things." June looked through the broken gate, at the ash, the weeds, the shattered glass, and the black ribs of the place everyone had laughed at. "Yes," she said quietly. "It did." Then, she lifted the chain from the gate and led her daughter inside. The gate made a tired metal cry when June pushed it open. For a moment, neither she nor Emmy moved. The greenhouse stood in front of them in the gray rain, larger up close and sadder than it had looked from the road. Its roof had fallen inward in 2 places. The remaining glass hung from the frame in sharp, cloudy pieces. The blackened ribs rose over them like the bones of an animal that had died reaching for the sky. June stepped carefully across the threshold. "Stay behind me," she told Emmy. The ground inside was not really a floor anymore. It was a mix of mud, ash, broken glass, and the remains of old planting beds. Every step made a soft crunch. Burned wooden benches leaned at strange angles. Rusted wire trays lay twisted beneath the weeds. In one corner, a stack of clay pots had fused together from heat and rain, their rims cracked like old teeth. The smell was the worst part. Wet ash, sour leaves, rust, cold earth. Something sealed too long and then forgotten. June pulled Emmy's hood tighter around her face. "This is ours?" Emmy asked. June looked at the collapsed wall, the black soil, the vines pushing through the frame. She wanted to lie in a way that would comfort the child. But she had promised herself long ago not to build safety out of falsehood. "Yes," she said. "It's ours." Emmy nodded, as if ownership itself was a kind of blanket. June walked the perimeter first, testing each place before letting Emmy follow. The west side was too dangerous. Sheets of glass lay hidden beneath moss. The back wall had bowed outward and would need bracing before any storm. But near the front corner, where the roof still held a narrow strip of tin, the ground was drier. A potting table had burned along one side but remained standing on 3 legs. It was not shelter, but it was a corner. June set down their bags there. By then, the rain had soaked through her coat again. Emmy's lips had gone pale. June took the 2 blankets from the truck and shook out the damp. She spread one over the least muddy patch of ground and folded the other around Emmy's shoulders. "I'm not cold," Emmy said through chattering teeth. "I know," June answered. "You're just practicing for warm." That brought out a small smile, and June held onto it like a match, cupped from wind. She found an old metal barrel behind the greenhouse, half full of rainwater and brown leaves. The water was not fit to drink, but it was enough to wash mud from their hands. Near the gate, half buried under blackberry vines, she discovered a stack of wooden stakes, brittle but usable. In the truck bed, she had the rusted shovel, the tire iron, the lantern, and duct tape. June made a list in her head because lists kept panic from spreading. Clear glass from one corner. Check roof above sleeping place. Find something to block the wind. Save clean water. Keep Emmy away from the west wall. She worked until her fingers went numb. She used the shovel to scrape glass into a pile. She dragged broken trays aside. She propped the 3-legged potting table with stones and pushed their bags underneath to keep them off the ground. She tore strips of duct tape and covered the sharpest edges of a broken frame where Emmy might pass too close. No one came. No neighbor stopped at the road. No church lady brought soup. No sheriff drove up to say there had been a misunderstanding. The forest watched in silence, dripping water from every branch. As evening gathered, the greenhouse darkened early beneath the trees. June lit the lantern and set it on the potting table. Its small yellow circle showed just enough of the ruin to make the darkness around it feel deeper. Emmy sat wrapped in the blanket, drawing in the air with one finger. "What are you making?" June asked. "A bed," Emmy said, "and a window, and a door that locks." June turned away before her face could change. She went outside and searched near the old service shed behind the greenhouse. The shed door hung open. Inside were mouse nests, damp seed trays, and a rusted hand rake. On a shelf above the door, she found a dented tin cup, a coil of garden twine, and 3 packets of matches sealed inside a glass jar. June held the jar for a long moment. It was such a small thing. Matches, twine, a rake, but small things had kept her alive before. Back inside, she cleared a place near the front opening and made a tiny fire inside the metal barrel after tipping out the dirty water. It smoked badly at first, then caught on dry scraps from beneath the potting table. Warmth pushed weakly against the cold. Emmy held out her hands. "It smells bad," she said. "It's working," June said. They ate crackers from the glove box and the last apple June had saved from the diner kitchen. She cut the apple in half with her pocket knife and gave the larger piece to Emmy. "You didn't eat much," Emmy said. "I had some earlier." It was not true, but it was the kind of lie mothers told when love had no money left. After dark, the rain thinned to a mist. June tucked Emmy beneath both blankets and sat beside her until the child's breathing grew slow. Then she rose quietly and walked the greenhouse with the lantern. The place looked different at night. Broken things became shapes. Blackened beams became shadows. Water drops gathered on the remaining glass and caught the lantern light like small, uncertain stars. June stopped near the middle row of planting beds. At first, she thought the green she saw was moss. Then, she lowered the lantern. A single sprout had pushed through the ash. It was no taller than her thumb, with two pale leaves trembling in the cold. Around it, the soil was black and wet. Above it, the roof was broken. Nothing had protected it. Nothing had helped it. Still, it had come up. June crouched slowly. She did not touch it. She only held her hand near it, feeling the faint warmth of her own palm reflected back from the earth. Her mother's voice came to her so clearly that for a moment she could have been standing in one of those rented rooms again. "We keep what still has roots." June closed her eyes. All day, she had been telling herself this place was only a way to stay out of the truck. A corner. A dry strip of floor. A mistake she had made because $11 could not buy anything better. But there, in the dark, with Emmy sleeping under a broken roof and a single green thing rising from the ash, June felt the first thin thread of something she was almost afraid to name. Not hope exactly. Hope was too large a word. This was smaller, rougher, and more stubborn. It was the feeling of one finger finding a hold in a wall that had looked smooth. June carried the lantern back to the front corner and sat beside her daughter. Wind moved through the broken panes. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called once and fell silent. The greenhouse was ruined. The night was cold. Tomorrow would bring problems she did not yet know how to solve. But for the first time since Wade Barlow had taken her notebook, June was sitting on ground that belonged to no man who could order her out by morning. She looked toward the dark row, where the tiny sprout waited beneath the ash. Then she whispered, so softly only the greenhouse could hear her. "All right. Show me what you need." By morning, the little sprout was still there. June checked it before she checked the sky, before she checked the truck, before she even let herself think about breakfast. It stood in the same bed of blackened soil, pale green against all that ash, stubborn enough to make no sense. Emmy came up beside her with the blanket around her shoulders. "Is it ours too?" she asked. June looked at the sprout, then at the ruined frame above it. "I suppose it is." "What kind is it?" "I don't know yet." That answer bothered June more than it should have. She had never liked not knowing the name of a thing. Names mattered. A person with a name was harder to erase. A plant with a name could be understood, tended, maybe saved. After crackers and cold water from the jug in the truck, June began clearing the middle row. She did not have a real plan. She only knew that sitting still made fear louder. Work gave her something to push against. She used the rusted shovel to scrape wet ash from the old planting beds. She pulled dead vines loose from the metal frame. She filled a broken tray with glass shards and carried it outside again and again until her hands ached. Emmy helped by collecting small stones and placing them in a careful line along the front corner. "It's a path," she explained. "To where?" "To the warm part," Emmy said. June almost told her there was no warm part yet. Instead, she nodded. "Then make it strong." Near noon, the shovel struck something under the ash with a sound that did not belong to stone. June stopped. She crouched and brushed the black soil aside with her fingers. At first, she saw only a curve of dark metal. Then the shape came clear, a ring, flat against the ground, almost hidden by soot and roots. Her breath slowed. She dug around it with the tip of the shovel. The ring was attached to something wooden beneath the packed earth. Not a board from a planting bed, not a fallen shelf. This wood was set low, square, and deliberate. June wrapped both hands around the ring and pulled. Nothing moved. She tried again, bracing one foot against the edge of the bed. The ring groaned, but the wood beneath it stayed sealed. Emmy stepped closer. Is it a door? I don't know. But June did know one thing. People did not put iron rings in the ground for no reason. She scraped more ash away and found the faint edge of a hatch, blackened by fire and swollen by years of rain. Soil had packed tight around the seams. A root as thick as her thumb crossed one corner like a lock nature had grown over it. June's heart beat harder than the work required. She fetched the tire iron from the truck and tried to wedge it beneath the edge. The old wood gave a little, then stuck. She pushed until her shoulder burned. The tire iron slipped, cutting a shallow line across her palm. She hissed and stepped back. Mom, it's all right. June wrapped her hand in the hem of her shirt. Just a scratch, but the sight of blood on her skin steadied her more than it frightened her. It reminded her that the place was real. The work was real. Whatever lay beneath that hatch, if anything did, would not be handed to her gently. She left it alone for the moment. Not because she had stopped wondering, because she had learned long ago that forcing a thing before understanding it could break the very thing you needed. In the afternoon, while gathering broken trays from the back wall, June found the second clue. It was a small strip of metal, half buried in the mud beneath blackberry vines. At first, she thought it was scrap. Then she rubbed it clean against her sleeve and saw letters stamped into the surface. Valeriana Officinalis. Below that, in smaller letters, someone had scratched a number by hand. Row Shesht. June turned it over. The back was blackened, but not ruined. It had once been a plant marker. She searched the same patch and found two more. Achillea millefolium, calendula. The names stirred something in her memory. Calendula had been in her notebook on the last pages she no longer had. Lavender for sleep, mint for the stomach, calendula for skin. She sat back on her heels with the metal tags in her palm. The greenhouse had not only grown flowers for porches, it had grown useful things, healing things. The kind of things Emmy had once drawn without knowing why. Things that smell good. Things that make people better. The thought made June look again at the crooked sign near the gate. Rusk Medicinal Nursery. Rusk. She had heard the name all her life, though never often. Dr. Helen Rusk lived in a small white house past the old clinic road. She had delivered babies before the hospital started sending women to the city. She was retired now, mostly seen at the post office or walking alone with a cane, her silver hair pinned tight and her face hard to read. By late afternoon, June wrapped the metal tags in a clean scrap of cloth, put Emmy in the truck, and drove the muddy road back toward town. She nearly turned around twice. Pride told her not to ask anyone for anything. Fear told her Wade's story had already reached every porch and counter. But the tags in her pocket felt heavier than embarrassment. Dr. Rusk's house stood behind a fence covered in wet climbing roses. The garden was sleeping for the season, cut back and brown, but every bed had been edged with care. June saw that before she saw the woman watching from the porch. Dr. Helen Rusk was tall despite her age, wrapped in a gray cardigan, one hand resting on a cane. "If Wade sent you," she called, "you can tell him I still don't sell land through cowards." June stopped at the gate. "He didn't send me." Dr. Rusk studied her. "Then what do you want?" June opened the cloth and held out the metal tags. "I bought the greenhouse on East Road," she said. "I found these." For a moment, the old woman did not move. Then she came down the porch steps slowly, one careful step at a time. She took the first tag from June's palm and turned it toward the gray light. Her expression changed so quickly, June almost missed it. Not surprise. Pain. Dr. Rusk looked from the tag to June's face. "Where?" she asked quietly. "Did you find this?" "In the greenhouse. That place burned." "I know." "No," Dr. Rusk said, her fingers closing around the metal marker. "You don't." June felt the cold slip under her coat. Behind her, Emmy stood silent beside the truck, holding the purple open sign against her chest. Dr. Rusk looked past June toward the east road, though the greenhouse was miles away and hidden by rain and trees. Then she said, almost to herself, "If those tags survived, then maybe she was right." June heard the words clearly. Who was right? The old woman did not answer. She only handed the tag back with a hand that trembled once before growing still. "Do not let Wade Barlow near that ground," she said. June looked at the metal marker in her palm, then at the woman on the porch. For the first time, the burned greenhouse no longer felt like a place she had bought by accident. It felt like a place someone had tried very hard to bury. Dr. Helen Rusk came to the greenhouse the next morning in a truck older than June's, with a canvas bag beside her and mud on the hem of her gray coat. She did not greet the place when she stepped through the gate. She stood in the rain and looked at the burned frame, the collapsed benches, the black soil, and the crooked sign that still carried her family name. For a moment, June saw not a retired doctor, but someone returning to a room where grief had been left waiting. Emmy stayed close to June. "Did you live here?" the child asked. Dr. Rusk looked down at her. "No, my sister did." The answer settled over the greenhouse more heavily than the rain. June led her to the middle row and showed her the iron ring. Dr. Rusk knelt slowly, though it hurt her knees. She brushed ash from the edge of the hatch with 2 fingers, the way June's mother had once tested soil. "My sister's name was Clara," she said. "Clara Rusk. She grew plants here for people who could not afford doctors every time life hurt them." June looked toward the old sign. "The town never talks about this place." "No," Dr. Rusk said. "The town prefers stories that make powerful men comfortable." Together, they worked around the hatch. June cut away the root, crossing one corner. Dr. Rusk handed her tools from the canvas bag: a pry bar, a folding saw, a stiff brush, a small bottle of oil. They did not talk much. The work asked for both hands and all their breath. June scraped soil from the seams. Dr. Rusk brushed the iron hinges until rust flaked away in red-brown curls. Emmy carried stones from the edge and laid them in her careful path to the warm part, stopping now and then to watch the 2 women fight with the hidden door. When June poured oil along the hinge line, the smell rose sharp and metallic through the wet ash. "Wait," Dr. Rusk said. June paused with both hands on the ring. "If this is what I think it is, open it slow. The air down there has been closed up a long time." June nodded. She pulled. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the hatch gave a deep wooden groan, as if the earth itself were waking. A crack opened along the seam. Cold air breathed upward, damp and dark, carrying a smell that did not belong to burned things. Soil, roots, dried leaves, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, lavender. Emmy whispered, "It smells like the picture." June did not ask what picture. She knew. With Dr. Rusk holding the lantern, June lifted the hatch all the way back. Beneath it, narrow wooden steps led into darkness. They were old, but not rotten. "I go first," June said. Dr. Rusk looked as if she might argue, then did not. "Test every step." June took the lantern, placed one boot on the first stair, and felt it hold. Then the next. Then the next. The air cooled around her shoulders as she descended beneath the greenhouse. The room below was larger than she expected. The lantern light moved over stone walls, shelves, clay jars, wooden crates, and bundles hanging from hooks in the beams. Some had collapsed into dust. Some remained wrapped in oilcloth. Along the far wall, narrow vents had been built into the foundation, angled to let air move without letting rain in. This was not a hole under a ruined building. This was a cellar made with knowledge. Dr. Rusk came down after her. When her shoes touched the floor, she put one hand against the stone wall and closed her eyes. "She did it," she whispered. June turned. "Clara?" Dr. Rusk nodded. "Everyone said she was foolish for digging under a greenhouse. She said roots needed a place to sleep." The first shelf held seed jars. Dozens of them. Each was sealed with wax and labeled in careful handwriting. Valerian, yarrow, calendula, comfrey, lemon balm, echinacea, Oregon grapefruit, elderflower, mint, lavender, Some labels had dates from 20 years earlier. Some had notes written in smaller script. Shade tolerant. Good after frost. Save strongest seed. Do not sell to Barlow. June read that last line twice. Dr. Rusk saw it too, and her mouth tightened. Barlow? June asked. Wade's father, Earl Barlow. He owned half the road before Wade learned to smile. On the next shelf were ledgers wrapped in cloth. June lifted one carefully and opened it on a dry crate. The pages were yellowed, but readable. Not bank ledgers. Growing ledgers. Rows planted. Dates watered. Soil temperatures. Customers served. Amounts charged. Amounts forgiven. June traced one column with her finger. Mrs. Delgado, salve, no charge. Pike family, fever tea, paid in eggs. Mill widow fund, 6 bundles, winter account. Logging camp clinic, calendula, and yarrow. Reduced rate. It was a business, June said. It was more than that, Dr. Rusk replied. It was the only place some families could come before pain became debt. June turned another page and found a folded sheet tucked inside. It was a map, not of roads, but of lines beneath the greenhouse. Narrow channels marked in blue, a cistern behind the north wall, a spring box up the slope, clay pipes running under the planting rows and down toward the old service shed. June stared at it. Water, she said. Dr. Rusk leaned closer. Clara always said the land held more than the county maps admitted. June remembered the auctioneer's words, partial water rights under county review. She remembered Wade at the auction, bidding only $1 more than she had, then stepping back with that easy smile. The greenhouse was not worthless. It had seeds, records, customers, water. It had a past someone had tried to reduce to ashes. On the lowest shelf, Emmy found a small tin box. I didn't open it, she said quickly, holding it out with both hands. June set it on the crate and lifted the lid. Inside lay letters tied with garden twine, a brass key, and a photograph of a woman standing in front of the greenhouse when it was whole. She was tall and narrow-shouldered, with dark hair pinned back and dirt on her sleeves. Beside her stood a younger Helen Rusk in a white nurse's uniform. Dr. Rusk took the photograph as if it might break. She was supposed to leave, she said. After the fire, I begged her to come stay with me in town. She said she had one more thing to finish. What happened to her? Dr. Rusk's eyes stayed on the photograph. She died that winter. Pneumonia, they said. But she had been living in a shed after the greenhouse burned. No insurance paid. No investigation stayed open. Earl Barlow bought the 2 lots beside this one within a month. June felt the room grow smaller. She opened the first letter. The handwriting matched the labels on the jars. If this place is ever found by a woman who has been told to move along, sell cheap, or be grateful for scraps, let her know this. The ground under her feet is not a favor. It is not charity. It is not a man's kindness. It is work and record and seed and water. Keep it in your own name. June had to stop reading. Since Wade took her notebook, she had felt as if her life had been cut loose from proof, as if what she knew, what she counted, what she endured, could vanish because a man with keys said it should. But here, beneath a burned greenhouse, another woman had kept records. Another woman had written things down. Another woman had known that someday someone might need evidence that survival had already been planted here. Dr. Rusk wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and pretended not to. There are customers in those books, June said. Families, clinics, people who used to buy from her. Some are dead, Dr. Rusk said. Some moved. Some are still here. And the water lines? If the spring box still works, this land can grow again. June looked around the cellar. At the jars, the ledgers, the map, the key, the letters, the sleeping seeds. She did not see treasure. No gold coins. No hidden fortune. Nothing that would make her life easy by morning. What she saw was harder. A way to begin. A responsibility. A set of instructions left by a woman who had been beaten down, burned out, and still refused to let the work die. June folded Clara's letter carefully and placed it back in the tin. Then she took the brass key and closed her fingers around it. What does it open? Emmy asked. June looked at Dr. Rusk. The old woman turned toward a narrow door at the back of the cellar, nearly hidden behind stacked crates. A small iron lock hung from it, dark with age. "I think," Dr. Rusk said quietly, "it opens the room Clara did not want Earl Barlow to find." June lifted the lantern. For the first time since the auction, fear and hope rose in her together. The greenhouse above them was still broken. Wade still owned the diner. The town still believed his story. But under the ash, under the laughter, under every word meant to make June small, there was a room full of seeds, records, water, and a dead woman's warning. And June understood then that she had not bought a pile of ashes. She had inherited a fight. They did not open the back room that morning. Dr. Rusk stood before the locked door with the brass key in June's hand and shook her head once. "Not yet," she said. "Why?" "Because if Clara hid that room from Earl Barlow, then we don't open it tired and shaking. We open it when we can document what is inside." That word, document, settled into June like a nail finding wood. She had lost her notebook. She had lost the numbers she had written against Wade. But down in that cellar were ledgers, dates, maps, labels, and letters, records, proof. A language men like Wade trusted only when it served them. So June slowed down. Dr. Rusk returned with a camera, file folders, cotton gloves, and clean paper. June photographed every shelf before moving anything. She copied jar labels by hand. She numbered the ledgers. She drew the water map twice while Emmy sat on an overturned crate and practiced writing calendula. If you are still here, subscribe for more stories about people the world underestimated, because what June found under that greenhouse was only the beginning of what others wanted buried. By late afternoon, June placed the brass key into the lock on the narrow back door. It resisted at first. Then it turned. Inside was not money. It was not a vault. It was a small dry room, lined with shelves, and covered in Clara Rusk's handwriting. Bundles of dried herbs hung from ceiling beams. Brown glass bottles sat in rows, labeled with recipes for salves, teas, tinctures, and poultices. There were folded paper packets printed with the name Rusk Medicinal Nursery, and beneath them, a hand-carved stamp of a leaf inside a circle. On the back wall, Clara had nailed a final sheet of paper. "Do not sell the water." June read it aloud. Dr. Rusk closed her eyes. The room gave June no easy fortune. It gave her work. It gave her a product line she did not yet know how to make, a water system she did not yet know how to repair, and seeds that might or might not wake after 20 years. Still, when she came back up into the cold greenhouse, the ruin no longer looked empty. It looked unfinished. The first sign of danger came before sunset. June saw tire tracks in the mud outside the gate, fresh and deep. A black truck sat near the road, engine running. Wade Barlow leaned against the hood in a wool coat, looking at the greenhouse as if it were a bad debt he had decided to collect. "You've been busy," he said. June stepped in front of Emmy without thinking. Dr. Rusk stood beside the gate, her cane planted in the mud. Wade's eyes moved from the old doctor to June, then to the open hatch, visible through the greenhouse frame. His smile thinned. "County sold you the structure," he said. "Not whatever hazard is underneath it." June kept her voice steady. "You don't know what's underneath it." "I know enough." He looked at the burned ribs above them. "This place is unsafe. A responsible mother would not keep a child here." Wade reached into his coat and took out an envelope. "I can help you out of a mistake," he said. $200. Cash. More than generous for a tax lot nobody wanted. June stared at the envelope. $200 would buy food, gas, a motel room for a few nights. It would also buy Wade the ground, the hatch, the cellar, the water, Clara's records, and every small piece of future June had only just begun to see. "No," she said. Wade waited, as if the word had come from someone who did not understand language. "No, no." His face hardened. "Don't be proud. Proud women with children end up begging from people they insulted." Dr. Rusk's cane struck the mud once. "Careful, Wade," he laughed. "Doctor, I figured you'd be too old to still haunt this place. And I figured you'd be too ashamed to come." For a second, something ugly moved behind his eyes. Then he tucked the envelope away. "All right," he said. "But when the county inspector comes and condemns this death trap, don't say I didn't offer you kindness." He got in his truck and drove away, throwing mud against the gate. June did not move until the sound faded. Emmy whispered, "Can he take it?" June wanted to say no immediately. Instead, she looked at Dr. Rusk. The old woman's face had gone grave. "He can try." By morning, he had. A county notice appeared on the greenhouse gate before breakfast. It ordered an inspection of the structure for unsafe occupancy, unauthorized cellar access, and possible contamination from unlicensed medicinal plant materials. June read the words 3 times. Unauthorized, contamination, unsafe. They were official words, clean words, words that could dress greed in a pressed shirt. At the post office, people stopped talking when June stepped inside. At the market, a woman moved her child away from Emmy and whispered something about poisonous weeds. By noon, someone had told the town that June was planning to sell homemade medicine from a burned building with no license, no training, and a child sleeping beside mold. Wade never needed to raise his voice when rumor could do the walking for him. June spent that day carrying every jar from the cellar to a dry shelf, then carrying half of them back because Dr. Rusk said the temperature below had protected them better than the air above. She learned the difference between seed and rootstock, common names and Latin names. Saving a thing, she realized, required first admitting how much she did not know. That humbled her. It also steadied her. In the afternoon, she followed Clara's water map to the north wall. Behind blackberry canes and a rotted fence post, she found a low stone box sunk into the hillside. Its wooden lid was soft with moss. When June pried it open, she heard water before she saw it. A thin, clear thread ran through the dark box and disappeared into a clay pipe. The spring was alive. June bent over it, dizzy with relief. Then she heard another engine. A white county vehicle stopped near the gate. A man in a rain jacket stepped out with a clipboard. Behind him came Wade, smiling under his black umbrella. The inspector looked at the greenhouse, then at Emmy standing near the gate with mud on her boots. "Mrs. Marlowe?" he asked. "Miss," June said. He glanced at his form. "We received a complaint." "I'm sure you did." Wade gave a soft chuckle. The inspector walked the property, marking broken glass, fire damage, temporary sleeping materials, and open cellar access. June answered what she could. Dr. Rusk answered what June could not. Emmy stood silent, holding the purple open sign so tightly the paper bent at the corners. When the inspector reached the spring box, Wade stepped forward. "That water line has been inactive for decades," he said. "The county needs to review it before anyone starts claiming rights." June looked at him then. That was why he had come to the auction. Not pity, not chance, not a joke, water. The greenhouse sat on a living spring, and Wade Barlow needed that spring for whatever he planned beyond the East Road. The inspector wrote something on his form. "We'll need documents," he said. June thought of Clara's map, Clara's ledgers, Clara's warning, "Do not sell the water." "I have documents," June said. Wade's umbrella tilted slightly. For the first time since she had known him, June saw uncertainty cross his face. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough. That night, after the county vehicle left and Wade drove away without another offer, June locked the hatch and sat beside Emmy under the broken roof. The rain began again, soft at first, then steady. Emmy rested her head against June's arm. "Are we in trouble?" June looked at the black ribs of the greenhouse, the small sprout in the ash, the path of stones Emmy had made, and the living water hidden under the hill. "Yes," she said, "but not the way he thinks." Below them, in the dark cellar, Clara Rusk's records waited. Above them, the rain fell through the broken glass. And between the two, June Marlowe began to understand that danger did not always mean you had found the wrong place. Sometimes it meant you had found exactly what someone else was afraid to lose. The first person to come was Ruthie. June saw her before sunrise, standing outside the greenhouse gate with her coat pulled tight and a paper grocery sack balanced against her hip. For a moment, June thought Wade had sent her. The thought shamed her, but fear had begun teaching June to expect every kindness to carry a hook. Ruthie did not come through the gate right away. "I can leave this here," she called. June stepped out from beneath the broken roof. "What is it?" "Bread, peanut butter, some apples." Ruthie looked down at the mud. "And a pair of gloves. My husband can't use them since the accident." June opened the gate. Ruthie came in slowly, eyes moving over the burned frame, the ash beds, the stone path Emmy had made. She stopped when she saw the little sprout in the middle row. "Well," she said quietly, "would you look at that?" June did not ask why Ruthie had not spoken up at the diner. The question stood between them anyway. Ruthie answered it without being asked. "I was scared," she said. "That's not an excuse. Just the truth." June took the grocery sack. "Truth is more than most people brought me." Ruthie's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "Wade's been shorting us for months. Maybe longer. I don't have your notebook, but I have my envelopes. I kept them because I thought maybe I was counting wrong." "You weren't," June said. "No," Ruthie whispered. "I don't think I was." She reached into her coat and handed June a stack of small pay envelopes, each one folded flat and marked with dates. June held them carefully. After Wade took her notebook, she had felt as if he had taken the ground from under her words. Now here, in Ruthie's trembling hand, was a piece of that ground returned. By noon, Dr. Rusk arrived with more than tools. She brought an old card catalog box full of patient notes she had been allowed to keep when the clinic closed, all stripped of private details but marked with family names and years. She placed it on the potting table beside Clara's ledgers. "These won't prove everything," she said, "but they can show the nursery served real families, not fantasies." June opened one card and saw a familiar surname: Pike, then Delgado, then Harlan. Names from Clara's books. Names still painted on mailboxes around town. "So they remember?" June asked. "Some will, some won't want to." Dr. Rusk removed her gloves. "Memory is like a muscle. Leave it unused too long, and people start calling weakness peace." That afternoon, June went with her to visit the first family. Mrs. Delgado lived in a small blue house near the mill road, with marigolds and coffee cans on the porch. She was 81 and sharp-eyed, with a voice that had not softened with age. When Dr. Rusk showed her the calendula tag, Mrs. Delgado crossed herself. "Clara's place," she said. "My boy burned his arm on a stove. She sent salve and would not take money." "Do you remember the greenhouse?" June asked. "I remember who wanted it gone." She did not say Wade's name at first. She said Earl Barlow, Wade's father. She said Earl had wanted the water line because he planned rental cabins along the East Road. She said Clara refused him at least 3 times. She said water that helped poor people should not become water for rich men's lawns. June wrote it down on paper Dr. Russ gave her, not in her old notebook. That was gone, but the act of writing steadied her hand all the same. The next day, a man named Frank Pike came to the greenhouse with a pipe wrench, 2 buckets of fittings, and a limp from an old logging injury. He had heard from Ruthie that June had found Clara's water map. "My mother used to send me here with a basket," he said. "I don't know plants, but I know pipes." He followed the old clay line from the spring box to the greenhouse wall. He tapped, listened, dug, and cursed softly whenever a root had cracked something important. Emmy followed at a distance, carrying the smallest wrench like a badge of office. By evening, muddy water coughed from one broken line near the planting beds. Frank shut it off, cleaned the joint, replaced a cracked section, and tried again. This time the water ran clearer. It came slowly at first, then in a steady, narrow stream along the old channel beneath the row. June stood watching it move through the greenhouse. Water in a place Wade had called dead. Frank wiped his hands on his pants. "System's old, but it's not gone." That became the work of the next week. Not a miracle, not a sudden rescue. Work. Ruthie came before her shift and helped clear glass. Marta arrived one evening with a box of jars and said only, "I should have said something." Beth brought paper bags from the diner pantry and cried so hard June had to put both hands on her shoulders and tell her to breathe. A retired teacher copied Clara's labels in clean print. A church widow brought seed trays. Mrs. Delgado sent cuttings from plants she had kept alive for years without knowing they had begun at Rusk Nursery. Frank patched pipes. Dr. Rusk taught June how to test old seeds by soaking them between damp cloths and waiting for the smallest sign of life. June accepted help, but she did not surrender the work. She rose before dawn to check the cellar temperature. She copied ledgers by lantern light. She learned which roots were useful and which were dangerous. She marked every jar, every packet, every pipe repair. She took photographs with Dr. Rusk's camera and made duplicates of the water map. When people asked what she planned to do, she did not say she was waiting for permission. She said, "I'm reopening under my name." The words frightened her each time. Then they began to feel true. Near the end of the week, Ruthie brought something wrapped in wax paper. June opened it on the potting table. Inside was a page torn from Wade's office ledger. Ruthie's face had gone pale. "I know stealing is wrong." June looked at the page. It listed land inquiries along East Road, including the 2 lots beside the greenhouse, and a notation beside tax lot 14. Secure before water review. June did not speak for several seconds. Ruthie touched the table. He left the book open. "I copied the page first, then I panicked and tore it out." Dr. Rusk leaned over June's shoulder. "That is not panic," she said. "That is evidence." June looked at Ruthie, then at the greenhouse around them. Broken glass still waited in corners. Half the roof was still open. The nights were still cold. Wade still had money, friends, and a voice people were used to obeying. But June no longer stood alone in the rain. Around her were envelopes, memories, water, ledgers, labels, pipe repairs, and women who had begun to remember that silence had never protected them. Emmy came in from outside, carrying the purple open sign. She had traced the letters again, darker this time, so they could be seen from farther away. "Not yet," June said gently. "I know," Emmy answered. "I'm just making it stronger." June looked at the child, then at the people gathered beneath the burned ribs of the greenhouse. "Yes," she said, "that's what we're doing." The town hearing was held on a Thursday evening in the old municipal room above the fire station. June arrived with mud on the hem of her skirt. Clara Rusk's ledgers in a cardboard file box, Ruthie's pay envelopes tied with string, and Emmy's purple open sign folded inside her coat pocket. Dr. Rusk walked beside her with a cane in one hand and Clara's water map in the other. Wade Barlow was already there. He sat near the front with 2 men from the county office and a representative from the timber company, all clean collars and folded hands. On the table before him lay a folder thick enough to look official. June knew that trick. Men like Wade understood that paper could frighten people before anyone read a word of it. The room filled slowly. Waitresses, mill workers, old families from the East Road, Mrs. Delgado, Frank Pike. The sheriff stood near the back wall, pretending not to take a side while standing on the side that had always kept him comfortable. The county inspector opened the meeting with a flat voice. "This hearing concerns tax lot 14, the burned commercial greenhouse on East Road, current owner June Marlowe, regarding unsafe occupancy, disputed water use, and proposed redevelopment consideration." Proposed redevelopment. June looked at Wade. There it was at last, dressed in public language. Wade stood first. He spoke gently. That was what made it worse. He told the room he was worried about a child sleeping in a burned structure. He said June was unstable after losing her job. He said she had no license, no horticultural training, no business plan, and no right to claim a water system that had not been active in decades. Then, he looked straight at her. "Sometimes pride makes people dangerous," he said, "especially people who don't understand what they're handling." A few heads turned toward June. She felt the old heat of shame rise in her face, but she did not let it move her feet. The inspector asked, "Miss Marlowe, do you have a response?" June stood. For a second, all she could hear was the rain tapping the high windows. Then, she remembered her mother's hands pressing soil. She remembered Clara's handwriting. She remembered Emmy's drawing of a door that belonged to them. "I do," June said. She opened the first ledger. This greenhouse was not abandoned because it had no value. It was burned, closed, and forgotten after Clara Rusk refused to sell the spring water beneath it. Wade laughed softly. That is a serious accusation from a woman who worked tables last month. June looked at him. I did work tables. That is how I learned to count. The room quieted. She placed Clara's ledgers on the table. Planting records, customer lists, water maintenance notes, receipts from families still sitting in the room. Dr. Rusk laid down the hand-drawn map showing the springbox and clay pipe system. Frank Pike stepped forward and confirmed the water lines still worked. Mrs. Delgado testified that Clara had provided salve for her son and refused payment when the family had none. Then Ruthie stood. Her hands shook, but she did not sit back down. She gave the inspector the pay envelopes. She explained how the tips had been short for months. Marta spoke after her. Then Beth, one by one, the women Wade had kept quiet, began placing small pieces of truth on the table. Wade's face changed. Not all at once. Slowly. Like a door closing from the inside. That has nothing to do with the greenhouse, he snapped. It has everything to do with why you wanted me gone, June said. She unfolded the page Ruthie had taken from Wade's ledger and placed it beside Clara's map. Secure before water review. The timber representative leaned forward. The inspector read the line twice. June did not raise her voice. You can question my education. You cannot change the records. No one laughed then. Dr. Rusk opened Clara's final letter and read only the last sentence. Keep it in your own name. When she finished, the municipal room held a silence deeper than embarrassment. It was the silence of people realizing they had watched a woman be pushed toward the edge and called it gossip. The county did not give June everything that night. Life rarely turned that clean. But the condemnation order was suspended. The water review was delayed pending historical records. The timber company withdrew its immediate interest until ownership and water access could be verified. Wade's complaint was entered into the record alongside evidence that made his concern look much less like kindness and much more like strategy. 3 weeks later, the diner closed for investigation. Not forever. Not dramatically. Just long enough for inspectors to remove boxes from Wade's office while half the town watched from across the road. By then, June had already moved forward. She did not wait for people to decide she was respectable. She repaired the greenhouse one section at a time. Frank helped brace the west wall. Ruthie and Marta cleared the last of the glass. Dr. Rusk taught June how to wake old seeds without wasting them. Mrs. Delgado brought cuttings from plants Clara had once given away. Emmy painted stone markers in careful purple letters. The first tray to sprout was calendula. June cried when she saw it, though she told Emmy it was only because she had rubbed her eyes with dirty hands. Orders came slowly. A salve for cracked logging hands, dried mint for tea, lavender sachets from plants grown out of cuttings, not miracle seeds. A small clinic 2 towns over asked for calendula and yarrow once Dr. Rusk wrote a letter explaining the nursery's history. One afternoon, Wade came to the greenhouse alone. He looked thinner. Not sorry. Only reduced. June met him at the gate. I'll give you $5,000, he said. Cash. You walk away clean. June thought of all the nights $5,000 would have sounded like salvation. She thought of the truck, the cold, the storage room, the notebook he had taken. She thought of Clara Rusk living in a shed after the fire, refusing to sell the water. No, June said. Wade's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're refusing. Yes, she said. I do. He looked past her at the rows of repaired benches, the clean glass panels, the watering channels carrying spring water under the beds. This place won't make you rich. June almost smiled. That was never what it was for. Then she closed the gate. Months passed. The greenhouse did not become beautiful all at once. It became useful first, then sturdy, then warm. By early autumn, new panes had replaced the broken glass along the front wall. The roof still held patches, but sunlight came through in long, clean strips. The old potting table had been sanded and braced. Clara stamped the leaf inside the circle, sat beside June's new labels. Rusk Marlowe Medicinal Greenhouse. Dr. Rusk said Clara would have pretended not to like the name, then cried where nobody could see. On opening morning, Mist hung low over the Oregon road. The fir trees dripped silver. Inside the greenhouse, rows of young plants stood in black soil. Calendula, mint, lavender, yarrow, lemon balm. Not enough to save the whole world. Enough to begin. Emmy stood at the door with the purple sign she had drawn months earlier in the back booth of the diner. The paper had been pasted onto wood now, sealed carefully so rain could not take it. Open. June knelt beside her daughter. "Ready?" she asked. Emmy nodded, serious as a judge. Together, they hung the sign on the greenhouse door. The first customers were not many. Ruthie came with her twins. Mrs. Delgado came with a basket. Frank Pike came pretending he needed nothing and left with balm for his hands. A young mother from the mill road bought mint and asked June how to keep it alive. June showed her 2 fingers pressed lightly into the soil. "Don't drown it just because it looks thirsty," she said. The words passed through her before she realized she had said them. For a moment, she felt her mother there, Clara too. All the women who had kept something alive in rooms too cold, towns too small, lives too hard. That evening, after everyone left, June carried her blue replacement notebook down into the root cellar. She placed it on the shelf beside Clara's ledgers. On the first page, she wrote the date. Then she wrote, "First opening day, 23 customers, 7 sales, 4 gifts, water running clear." Emmy smiled all morning. She paused, then added one more line. "This ground is still ours." June closed the notebook and climbed back into the greenhouse. Outside, the sun was lowering behind the firs. The repaired glass caught the light and held it for a moment, turning the whole place gold. Emmy was asleep on a blanket near the potting table, one hand resting beside the open sign. June stood in the doorway and looked at the road that had once brought her there with $11, no job, no home, and no proof anyone would ever believe her. The world had called her disposable. The world had called the greenhouse worthless. But she had stayed long enough to listen. And beneath the ash, the place had given her back more than work, more than shelter, more than a name on a county paper. It had given her a future she could open with her own hands. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to remember that a broken beginning does not mean a broken life.